Good evening, friends. Get ready for 5 more chilling, real horror stories. Before we start, where are you listening from and what time is it? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Thanks in advance. Now, without further ado, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's dive straight into the fear. I was alone when I heard the first knock. It was loud, too loud for this time of night. My parents weren't supposed to be home for hours. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the door frame. My stomach twisted as I put my phone down. Something felt wrong. I wasn't supposed to be scared. I was 13 now, old enough to stay home alone, old enough to take care of myself. At least that's what my parents said. They'd gone to a dinner party across town, leaving me with a frozen pizza and a list of emergency contacts taped to the fridge. Our neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina was safe. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes after dark and people left their doors unlocked during the day. But I locked ours. I stood from the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. Our tabby cat, Milo, was perched on the windowsill, his tail flicking rhythmically. He was staring at the front door, his ears flattened, and then he hissed. That's when the doorknob started to turn. I froze. I hadn't heard a car pull up. There was no reason for anyone to be here. My parents would have texted. A neighbor would have called out my name. But whoever was on the other side wasn't saying a word. Milo jumped down and bolted under the couch. I took a step back, my breath coming in quick, uneven bursts. What the hell was happening? The knocking stopped. Silence. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move. The front door had a peephole. If I could just knock. The sound exploded through the quiet house, shaking me to my core. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. This time it wasn't a knock, it was a fist. Pounding, slamming. Whoever was out there wanted in. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. I dialed my dad's number. Voicemail. My heart was racing so fast I could barely think straight. My mom. Voicemail. I was completely alone. And then, the handle stopped moving. The knocking stopped. The house went eerily quiet, like everything was holding its breath. I stood there gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached, my ears straining for any sound. And that's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate scratching. Not at the front door. It was coming from the back window. The sound was slow and deliberate. A scratch, then another. Nails dragging against the glass, just enough to let me know someone was there. My entire body locked up. The back window led to our fenced yard. No one should be back there. No one could be back there, unless they climbed over the fence. My breathing turned shallow. I forced myself to move, inching toward the hallway. The living room lights were on, but the kitchen, where the back window was dark. Shadows stretched across the tile floor like grasping fingers. I didn't want to go. I had to go. Milo slunk forward, his movement slow and predatory. His fur bristled, and he let out a low, guttural growl. My mouth went dry. I had never heard him make that noise before. Then, tap, tap, tap. I swallowed a scream. The sound was coming from the glass. Not a branch, not the wind. A hand. I reached the edge of the hallway, gripping the wall to steady myself. My heart slammed against my ribs as I forced myself to look, and there it was. A face, pressed against the window. Pale. Expressionless. Its lips were slightly parted, breath fogging up the glass. Eyes too wide, too dark, locked onto mine. I stumbled back, slapping a hand over my mouth to keep from making a noise. My vision blurred with terror. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. The thing outside didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. My phone. I had to call 911. My fingers fumbled on the screen, but they were shaking so badly that I could barely type. My breath hitched as I pressed the call button. 1 ring. 2. Then, The face grinned, slow, deliberate, too wide, teeth too white. My stomach flipped. Then came the noise, the one that shattered every ounce of control I had left. A thud from the front door, like something heavy had just slammed against it. I ran. I bolted down the hallway, my socks skidding on the hardwood floor. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tore into my bedroom and slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. Milo darted in behind me, leaping onto the bed, his eyes wide and wild. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed, gripping it so tightly my knuckles burned. My back pressed against the wall. The silence was suffocating. And then, the doorknob started to turn. The doorknob twisted, once, twice, rattling, testing. My body locked up. My fingers dug into the bat, my knuckles white with pressure. This can't be happening. I didn't breathe, didn't move. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. They were waiting, drawing it out. And then, silence. No more rattling, no footsteps. Just the suffocating weight of quiet pressing against my ears. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, scratch, scratch, scratch. The noise came from under the door. No, 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 Milo hissed, his back arched, fur standing on end. My entire body trembled as I stared at the thin gap beneath the door. A shadow moved. Something was kneeling on the other side. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. My heart was slamming against my ribs, threatening to crack them open. I had to do something. I forced my fingers to move, unlocking my phone, trying again. 911. My breath caught as the ringing started. Please, pick up. Then, footsteps. Not slow. Running. Away from my door, through the hallway, toward the front door. My eyes widened as I heard it. Click. The deadbolt unlocking. I barely had time to react before, bam! The front door slammed open. Cold air rushed into the house, sending a burst of terror straight through my chest. They were inside. A voice, low, barely more than a whisper, drifted from the hallway. I found you. I sprinted. Not out. Up. I tore across the room, flinging my window open so hard it rattled. My hands fumbled against the frame as I climbed onto the roof, my breath ragged and uneven. The wind hit me like ice. Below, the front door creaked as it swung back and forth. The house was open. Exposed. I crouched low, my body shaking violently. Where were they? Then, movement. A shadow stepped out onto the lawn. Tall. Too tall. They stopped at the end of the driveway, just standing there, watching. And then, they waved. A slow, mocking wave. I didn't move, didn't blink. My body refused to function. A moment later, a pair of headlights turned the corner. My parents. My chest collapsed with relief. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw myself off the roof and run to them, but my voice was gone. The headlights washed over the driveway, and the figure was gone. No footprints, no open gate, nothing, like they had never been there. I told my parents everything. They didn't believe me, said I must have dozed off on the couch. Imagined it. Had a nightmare. The door was locked when they got home, no signs of anything, but Milo never came back. I searched the entire neighborhood. I put up flyers. I left out food. He was gone. Then, a week later, just after midnight, I heard it. Scratch, 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 at the front door. I sat up in bed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house was dark. Too dark. Then, a meow, Milo's meow. My stomach twisted violently. I knew that sound. I had heard it 100 times before. But something was wrong. It was off, like someone was mimicking it. I stood slowly, my feet ice cold against the floor. I moved toward the door, my pulse hammering against my ribs. My hand hovered over the lock. Then, a voice. Soft. Whisper thin. Let me in. I ran, and I never looked at that door again. At the end of the story, you might think it's just a horror tale, but the real case happened in Brazil. We only changed the names and locations to preserve anonymity and to familiarize them with American places. Now, let's dive into the horror story. Libraries are supposed to be quiet, but that night I heard breathing. I was alone in the Jefferson Public Library, finishing up a late shift. It was past midnight, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting long, uneasy shadows between the bookshelves. Outside, the streets of Cincinnati, Ohio were empty, just the occasional flicker of a passing car's headlights through the tall windows. I had worked here for almost a year. The silence never bothered me before, but that night, something felt off. I was pushing a heavy cart of books back to the history section, moving slow, exhausted, when I heard it. A shuffle. Soft. Faint. Somewhere in the stacks behind me. I froze, gripping the edge of the cart. The air shifted, like the room itself was inhaling. I wasn't supposed to be alone. My manager, Tom, had left an hour ago, and I had locked the doors behind him. There was no one else in the building, or so I thought. Turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The rows of books stretched into dark corridors, the dim glow of the emergency exit sign barely illuminating the far end of the library. Nothing moved. I swallowed hard and kept pushing the cart, forcing myself to focus. Maybe it was just the building, settling. Old places creaked, right? Then, a book hit the floor. I jerked toward the sound, my heart slamming against my ribs. It had come from the farthest aisle. I took a step forward, then another, my sneakers barely making a sound against the old linoleum. I reached the end of the row and turned the corner. A book lay face down in the middle of the floor. I stared at it, my breath coming in short bursts. The shelves were packed tight. There was no way that book had fallen on its own. I took another cautious step. That's when I noticed something else. A knife. Sticking out from between two books. I stopped breathing. It was a kitchen knife. Long and sharp, wedged into the space between the hardcovers as if someone had hidden it there. The air felt wrong. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might be sick. I reached for my phone with a shaking hand. My thumb hovered over the screen, ready to call Tom, ready to call anyone, but then, a whisper, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." My vision exploded in terror as I spun around, my body crashing into the bookshelf. No one was there. But, in the dim light of the aisle just beyond my reach, I saw them, a figure, motionless, watching, and in their hand, another knife. The knife glinted in the dim light. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figure stood at the end of the aisle, half hidden in the shadows between the bookshelves. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body, hunched slightly, the blade hanging at their side. I gripped my phone so tight my fingers ached. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. Then, they took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath their weight. My stomach plummeted. I stumbled backward, knocking into the bookshelf behind me. The books shuddered from the impact, one tumbling off the shelf and landing near my foot with a dull thud. The figure tilted their head, slow, calculated, like they were studying me. My mouth was dry. I forced myself to move, my body screaming in protest as I took a step back, then another. The figure moved too, closing the distance. No rush, no hesitation, like they knew I had nowhere to go. I swallowed back a sob, my throat tight. My mind raced, scanning every possible escape route. The exit was too far. The back door was locked. The security desk had nothing but a cheap pair of scissors. But then my eyes flicked to the knife in the bookshelf. I lunged, my fingers wrapped around the handle just as the figure charged. I barely had time to react before they slammed into me. The impact sent us both crashing against the shelves, books raining down around us. My back exploded in pain as I hit the floor, the knife slipping from my grip and skidding across the linoleum. A hand clamped down on my wrist, tight, crushing. I gasped, struggling, but they were strong, their grip bruising, their knee pressing into my ribs, pinning me down. And then, I saw their face. It was a man. Mid-40s, gaunt, unshaven, his skin stretched thin over his cheekbones. But it was his eyes that made my blood run cold, empty, dead, like he wasn't just looking at me. He was looking through me. His lips curled into a grin. "You weren't supposed to find that," he murmured. Then he raised the knife. A flash of silver. I screamed, fought, kicked. Somehow, I wrenched free, rolling onto my side just as the blade slammed into the floor where my chest had been. The impact sent vibrations through the linoleum, the sharp sound ringing in my ears. I crawled forward, my palms burning against the rough surface. Where was my knife? The man was already moving. I grabbed the first thing my hand landed on, a heavy hardcover book, and swung it. The corner caught him in the side of the head with a sickening crack. He grunted, stumbling back. It was my chance. I ran. Down the aisle, past the rows of bookshelves, my vision tunneling as I sprinted for the staff break room. My lungs burned, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me, running, faster than I thought possible. The door to the break room was right there. I threw myself forward, gripping the handle, locked. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit them into the lock. Then, a hand grabbed the back of my hoodie. I was yanked backward. I slammed into the bookshelf behind me, the breath ripping from my lungs. My vision exploded in white-hot pain. He was on me again. This time, he pressed the knife against my throat, a thin, cold line of steel. "I just need you to be quiet," he whispered. His breath reeked of sweat and rot. I clawed at his arm, my nails digging into his skin. But he didn't flinch, didn't even react. The blade pressed harder. A thin, burning sensation bloomed across my neck, and that's when I knew I was going to die. The knife pressed deeper. A thin line of pain bloomed across my throat, sharp and cold. My pulse pounded against the blade, my body frozen in sheer terror. I could hear my own breathing, shallow, ragged, desperate. His face was too close. I could smell the sweat, the rot clinging to him like a second skin. His fingers dug into my hoodie, his grip tightening. "I don't want to kill you," he murmured. His voice was eerily calm. Too calm. But his hand didn't move. The knife stayed. A thin trickle of blood slid down my neck, warm against my skin. I was going to die. No, I wasn't. My right hand twitched against the bookshelf, searching. Anything. Then, my fingers wrapped around something. Cold. Heavy. Scissors. The cheap, dull pair from the front desk. I didn't think. I just moved. With every ounce of strength left in my body, I plunged the blades into his side. He screamed, a raw animal sound that ripped through the silence of the library. The knife pulled away from my throat as he stumbled back, his grip loosening just enough for me to shove him, hard. He collapsed against the bookshelf, his hands clawing at the scissors buried in his ribs. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. My legs were weak, my vision blurred from pain and exhaustion, but I sprinted like my life depended on it. Because it did. The exit was ahead. Just a few more feet. A crash behind me, a guttural groan, and then, footsteps. He was still coming. I threw myself against the exit door, fumbling with the lock, my hands slick with sweat and shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Click. The door swung open. I stumbled outside onto the cold pavement, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The streetlights overhead felt blinding, the outside world too big, too open after the suffocating darkness of the library. But I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 2 blocks away, collapsed onto the floor, and screamed for someone to call 911. The police found him, a few hours later, still inside the library. He hadn't run. He hadn't even tried to escape. When they arrested him, he was smiling, like it had all been some kind of game, like he had enjoyed it. He had been living in the library for weeks, sleeping in the basement, moving through the aisles at night, watching, waiting, and the knife in the bookshelf. It wasn't the only one. They found 5 more, hidden between books, under desks, behind the shelves, waiting for someone to find them, waiting for me. I never went back to work. I never set foot inside a library again. I still dream about it. The knife at my throat, the dead look in his eyes, the sound of his whisper, right next to my ear. You shouldn't be here. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night sweating, heart racing, my skin burning where the blade touched it, I swear I can still feel him standing there, still watching, still waiting for me to come back. Let me know if you enjoyed this type of story. Write story 2 in the comments to let me know you want more of this kind of story. I shouldn't have gone alone. That thought hit me the second I saw the boot, half buried in the dirt. It was old, worn leather, cracked at the seams, the kind that belonged to someone who had been out here too long. There were no footprints leading to it, no sign of the other boot. Just that single abandoned shoe sitting at the edge of Ridge Trail, like someone had stepped out of it and vanished. My stomach twisted. The late afternoon sun stretched my shadow long across the dirt, and for the first time since I'd started hiking this trail, I felt watched. I was 26, experienced enough to handle myself out here. I'd done tougher hikes, steeper climbs, riskier routes. That was the whole point, to push my limits, to prove I could handle anything. But something about that boot felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, told myself someone must have lost it. Maybe a storm carried it, maybe an animal dragged it, maybe. But the uneasy feeling stuck. I kept moving. The trail wound higher into the mountains, the trees thinning as I climbed. The air grew sharper, colder. I found a clearing just before sunset, a perfect spot to set up camp. The sky burned orange, the wind whispering through the pines. But the silence was heavy. Too heavy. I started a fire, forcing myself to relax. The warmth pushed back the chill in my skin, but not in my gut. I ate in silence, listening to the crackling, flames, watching the shadows stretch and shift. Then, I heard it. A single, slow whistle. My entire body tensed. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far enough. A long, drawn-out note just at the edge of the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the woods. The light cut through the dark, bouncing off trunks and rocks, but nothing, just trees, just shadows. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Then, another note. Broken. Uneven. Like someone trying to remember a tune. Someone. Not the wind. Not my imagination. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just listened. The whistling stopped. The air pressed against me, thick and heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I heard the sound that sent ice through my veins. A slow, dragging shuffle. Something was moving. Something was circling my tent. The shuffling sound stopped. For a moment all I could hear was the wind stirring through the trees, the crackle of dying embers in my fire pit. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. My muscles coiled so tightly that I thought my bones might snap. Then, crunch, a footstep, close. My skin prickled with cold terror. I gripped my knife, my fingers slick with sweat. The flashlight trembled in my other hand as I slowly, so painfully slowly, swept the beam toward the sound. The light hit footprints. Bare, deep imprints in the dirt circling my tent. But no one was there. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Something had been standing there, watching me. But now, gone. I swallowed down the rising panic and forced myself to move, stepping toward the prints. The dirt was still shifting inside them, the edges sharp, fresh. Then a gust of wind hit me, carrying something with it. Rot. The unmistakable stomach-churning stench of decay. I gagged, stumbling back, my mind racing. There was nothing dead out here. No roadkill. No carcass. That smell didn't belong. The wind died. And then, just as I took another step back, the whistling started again. Closer. The same broken melody, the same off-key notes. But now it was coming from two directions. One from the trees in front of me, one from behind. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might throw up. I was surrounded. Then the fire went out. Snuffed instantly, like someone had pressed a hand over it. Darkness swallowed me whole. And in the silence that followed, I heard it, a voice right outside my tent, low, crooked, wrong. I see you. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I ran. I sprinted down the trail, barely able to see through the suffocating dark. Branches tore at my arms, the ground uneven beneath my feet. My heartbeat roared in my ears, louder than the wind, louder than my gasps for breath. Then, movement. Something was running with me. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I could hear the footsteps, heavy, fast, keeping pace, too damn close. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, because the moment I did, I knew I wouldn't make it out alive. I ran until my vision blurred, until my legs screamed, until the cold mountain air burned my lungs raw, but it was still there, running with me. The footsteps never faltered. Heavy, fast, perfectly in sync with mine, mocking me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My entire body was running on terror, on pure instinct, my flashlight swinging wildly in my grip. The beam of light slashed through the darkness, catching glimpses of the trail, twisted roots, jagged rocks, the endless stretch of trees pressing in on me. And then, the whistling started again. Right next to me. I lost it. My foot caught on something, a root, a rock, maybe one of those bare footprints, and I hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through my ribs, my breath knocked from my lungs. The footsteps stopped. The air around me shifted. The presence I had been running from, it was here. Could feel it. I rolled onto my back, gasping, the flashlight shaking violently as I pointed it forward. The beam caught the trees, the empty dirt path, the fog rolling in through the brush. But no one was there. And then, my light flickered. For half a second, in that dim, dying glow, I saw them. The footprints, surrounding me in a perfect, deliberate circle, and they were fresh. Someone, something, had been standing right there watching me. The flashlight died. Complete blackness swallowed me, and then, breathing, low, close, right over my face. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Something cold touched my cheek. I jerked back, scrambling blindly in the dirt, my hands clawing for anything, rocks, roots, my knife. But all I felt was earth. And then, the whistling. Soft, right by my ear. I ran. I didn't care where. I didn't care if I went straight off a cliff. I just ran. Somehow, I made it back to the trailhead. My car sat alone in the dark, its metal body reflecting the weak light from the stars. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my keys, but I managed to rip open the door, throw myself inside, and slam the locks. I twisted the key. The engine sputtered. I screamed at it, slamming the gas pedal. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, my tires kicking up dust and gravel. I drove until I hit the highway, until the trees disappeared in my rearview mirror, until I felt like I could breathe again. And that's when I saw it. The boot, sitting perfectly in the middle of the road, directly in my headlights. Not the old, cracked one I'd found before. This one was mine, and inside it, something small, something wet, something that looked like a severed toe, a human toe. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. I just kept driving, my mind splintering, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself that none of this was real. But that night, when I got home, I heard it, outside my bedroom window. Soft, slow, that same broken whistle, and I knew I had never been alone on that trail, and I never would be again. I should have trusted my instincts. The moment we pulled up to that gas station, my stomach twisted into knots. The neon sign above the shack flickered weakly, barely clinging to life, casting an eerie red glow over the single rusted gas pump. It was the only sign of civilization for miles. The desert stretched endlessly around us, swallowing the road behind in darkness. Jake, my best friend since childhood, killed the engine and let out a frustrated sigh. The fuel gauge had been blinking for the last 10 miles. We had no choice but to stop. Creepy as hell, I muttered, eyeing the sagging roof of the shack. Jake chuckled, pushing open the door. Come on, Nate. It's just a gas station. Don't be a wuss. But something about the place felt wrong. The air was thick with the scent of dust and gasoline. The silence was unnatural. No wind, no crickets, no distant highway noise. Just dead stillness. Then, from the grimy window of the shack, I saw him. A figure stood inside, barely visible in the dim interior. He wasn't moving. He wasn't browsing shelves. He was just watching. A chill ran down my spine. The front door creaked open, and an old man stepped out. Wiry frame, sun-leathered skin, and a faded trucker hat pulled low over his hollow eyes. He didn't greet us, didn't smile, just wiped, his hands on a rag and muttered, "Need gas?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, fill it up." I couldn't stop staring at the figure inside. He was still there, still motionless. The filth-covered glass distorted his features, but I could feel his eyes, locked onto me. I swallowed hard. "Hey, The old man turned to me sharply. "You boys are taking the main road back, right?" Jake frowned. "Yeah, why?" The old man didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. His fingers twitched against the rag. "Just stick to the highway. Don't take any side roads. Not tonight." A sharp gust of wind kicked up a swirl of dust, and when I looked back at the window, the man inside was gone. My blood ran cold. Jake handed over a crumpled 20. The old man took it without another word, his hands trembling just slightly. I wanted to leave. Now. Jake slid into the driver's seat, but as soon as he turned the key, a single tap echoed against my window. Slow, deliberate. I turned my head. Face stared back. Pale. Stretched. Eyes too wide. Mouth curling into a grotesque grin, teeth jagged and wrong. And then, in a voice so soft it barely cut through the night, "Need a hand?" "Go! Drive!" I didn't recognize my own voice. It came out strangled, raw with terror. Jake slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched, kicking up a cloud of dust as we tore out of that hellhole. My chest was heaving, my pulse hammering. In my ears. I turned back. He was still standing there. The man, or whatever the hell he was, stood perfectly still in the glow of the flickering neon light. His face frozen in that impossible grin, teeth jagged and uneven, as if someone had shoved shards of bone into his gums at random. But the worst part? As we sped off down the highway, he lifted his hand and waved, not in anger, not in threat, in acknowledgement, like he knew something we didn't. The gas station faded into the night, swallowed by the endless desert. I let out a shaky breath and rubbed my hands over my face. Jake scoffed. "Dude, what the hell was that?" I shook my head. "You saw him too, right?" Jake tightened his grip on the wheel, his knuckles bone white. "Yeah, He swallowed. "I don't know, man. Maybe he was just some tweaker messing with us. I wanted to believe that. I really did. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. Nothing but desert on either side. The fuel gauge was steady now. Half a tank. No reason to worry. We'd be back in town in under an hour. And yet, something was gnawing at me. Something felt off. I checked my phone. No service. Not surprising, but unsettling all the same. The air in the car felt thick. Wrong. Like the atmosphere had shifted somehow. Then the headlights flickered. Once, twice. Then, darkness. The engine sputtered. The radio cut out. The hum of the tires against the road was gone. We were moving, but the world had gone silent. Jake cursed under his breath, gripping the wheel like a lifeline. No, 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 not now. The dashboard was dead. The speedometer read 0, but we were still coasting forward, and that's when I saw it. A signpost on the side of the road, weathered, rusted, unreadable. Except, we had been driving straight on the highway. We hadn't passed any intersections, any turnoffs. I twisted in my seat, my throat tightening. The gas station was behind us. It was impossible. We had been driving for 20 minutes, and yet, there it was. Same sagging roof, same flickering sign, only now, there was no one outside. Jake let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling. Nate, what the hell is happening? I stared ahead. My skin prickled with ice-cold dread, because up ahead, illuminated by our failing headlights, a figure stood in the middle of the road, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. Jake swerved, barely missing it. The car spun, tires shrieking against the pavement as we skidded into the dirt. I slammed against the door, pain shooting through my ribs. The engine was dead. The lights had flickered out completely. And then, a knock. Soft, gentle, right against my window. I turned my head slowly. A face was pressed against the glass. Too pale, too stretched, the same impossible grin, teeth too sharp, too uneven. His lips barely moved, but I heard his voice like it was inside my skull. I told you, don't take the side roads. My breath hitched in my throat. He was so close. His skin looked wrong, too smooth, too stretched, like it had been pulled tight over a skull that wasn't quite human. His teeth, God, those teeth, looked chipped and uneven, some too long, some too short, like they had been filed down into jagged points. And his eyes, they weren't reflecting the light. Even in the pitch black, even with the weak glow of the dashboard, his pupils should have caught some shimmer, some trace of movement. But there was nothing. Just bottomless, glassy black holes where his eyes should have been. Then he tapped the glass again. Slow, deliberate. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might vomit. Jake was frozen in the driver's seat, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. We need to go, he whispered, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned bone white. The thing outside tilted its head, that impossible grin stretching wider. My stomach dropped as I realized it was enjoying this. I reached for the door lock, my fingers trembling, and then the thing vanished. Not stepped away, not ran, just gone. The glass was clear again, no handprints, no breath, just empty, endless desert, and then the car radio blared to life. A horrible sound exploded through the speakers, like static, but wet, like something breathing in between the noise. The volume shot to maximum, filling the car with an awful guttural distortion, something shifting, whispering beneath the crackling waves of sound. And then, a voice. Not his voice. Something deeper, hungrier. You were never supposed to leave. The headlights burst back on, and suddenly, we were moving. Jake slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't stop. It was like something had grabbed the wheels, dragging us forward. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but something was wrong. The gas station was still there. No matter how far we drove, no matter how fast, the flickering sign loomed in the distance, waiting for us like an open grave. I clenched my jaw, my mind spiraling. We weren't driving in circles. The road itself was folding in on us. Jake's breath came out in short, ragged bursts. "Nate, what do we do?" My heart was a hammer in my chest. I didn't know. I didn't fucking know. And then, the dashboard clock started ticking backward. Not just the minutes, the date, the numbers unraveled, spinning faster and faster. And then the car slammed to a stop. Jake and I lurched forward, the seatbelts biting into our shoulders. The radio cut out. The headlights blinked off again. Silence. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. "Are we back?" Jake didn't answer. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale as death. I followed his gaze. We weren't on the highway anymore. We were parked in front of the gas station. But this time, the lights inside were on, and the front door was wide open. A sickening dread curdled in my stomach. I turned to Jake, panic rising in my throat. "We can't go in there." His hands were shaking, his pupils blown wide. "I don't think we have a choice." Then, from the speakers, a voice, his voice, spoke in a whisper-soft rasp. "Come inside." The doors unlocked, the engine died, and then, the last thing I remember, was the sound of footsteps, approaching fast, and a voice, inches from my ear, whispering, "You should have listened." Then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed 2 days later. A trucker had found us unconscious in an abandoned lot 30 miles away from the nearest gas station. The car was out of gas. Jake hasn't spoken about that night since. I tried searching for that station, looked up every fuel stop along the desert highways. It doesn't exist, but sometimes when I drive alone at night I see a flickering neon light in the distance, and I know it's waiting. I should have never stayed late that night. I tell myself that all the time. If I had just packed up at 5 like everyone else, if I had ignored that damn email, if I had just left, maybe none of this would have happened. But I didn't. And now, every time I walk into an empty room, I listen for the sound of fingers tapping against a desk. It started on a Thursday night. I remember because Thursdays were the worst. Long, dragging shifts in that cold, gray office, where the fluorescent lights buzz just loud enough to make your skin crawl. I was barely 2 months into the job, a junior analyst at some faceless corporate firm in Chicago, the kind of place where you drown in spreadsheets while the executives upstairs sip scotch behind soundproof glass. I was exhausted, running on, stale coffee and desperation when the email popped into my inbox, from Ryan Halloway, accounting dep. Subject, quick favor. I barely knew the guy. I'd seen him around, always hunched over his desk, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting his monitor, never talking to anyone. If you passed him in the hallway 100 times, you'd still forget his face. His email was short, almost too casual. "Hey, could you stay a little late? I need help transferring some client files to the secure server. Just a quick thing. I'll owe you one." Then came the part that should have made me stop and think. "I'll make it worth your time. $200 cash." That was weird, right? I mean, who pays their coworkers for help? But my bank account was running on fumes, and $200 just for staying an extra hour? I could deal with that. I replied, "Sure, no problem." By 7:30 p.m. the office was empty. I mean really empty. The kind of silence that makes your breath sound too loud. The janitor's cart sat abandoned in the hallway. The security guy downstairs was probably asleep. And outside, the city was swallowed by a thick October fog. I found Ryan in one of the side conference rooms. He had already set up an old company laptop, its screen casting a dull blue glow over his face. The second I stepped inside, I felt off. I couldn't explain it. The air in the room was wrong, thick, heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. Ryan barely looked up. "Hey, thanks for this, man." His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading off a script. I pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floor in the dead silence. "So, what do you need me to do?" He gestured to the screen. "Just help me move these files. Shouldn't take long." I nodded and started clicking through the folders. At first everything seemed normal, just rows of numbers, audit reports, typical accounting junk. But then I noticed something weird. Every file had a timestamp, and they were all from the future. Frowned. "Hey, these dates are—" Ryan cut me off. "Don't worry about that." I turned to him, and for the first time, really looked at him. His fingers were drumming lightly against the table. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, rhythmic sound, deliberate, like he was waiting for something. Then, in the corner of my eye, the conference room door moved, not swung open, not a gust of air. It pushed in just an inch, like someone was standing on the other side, waiting. Ryan didn't react, didn't even glance at it. I swallowed hard. "Did you hear that?" Tap, tap, tap. Ryan just kept drumming his fingers. His eyes locked on the screen, unblinking. That's when I saw the last file, the most recent timestamp. October 27th, 11:43 p.m. Employee name. Final entry, my name was on it. I hadn't clicked anything. The file just opened on its own. And then, the office lights cut out. The lights died all at once, not flickered, not dimmed, just gone. The room was plunged into a choking blackness, the only glow coming from the laptop screen. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to Ryan, my pulse hammering. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat there tapping his fingers. Tap, tap, tap. "Ryan?" My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. No response. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, the office was a void. The usual distant hum of the city was gone. No car horns, no sirens, nothing. I reached for my phone, my hands slick with sweat. No service. Then, a noise, a scraping sound coming from the hallway. Long, slow, like nails dragging across the office carpet. Something was out there. I forced myself to swallow. "Ryan, But when I turned to him, my stomach flipped. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost as if his neck had been partially snapped. His eyes, dull and glassy, were locked onto mine. His fingers? They weren't tapping anymore. The sound was still happening, but his hands were now completely still. Tap, tap, tap. I realized with cold horror that the noise was coming from behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed that if I turned, if I acknowledged it, something terrible would happen. Then, slowly, Ryan started smiling. It was wrong. Too wide. Lips stretching too far. Skin pulling unnaturally at the corners of his mouth. Like a puppet forcing a grin. Then, he whispered. So quiet I barely heard it. "Don't look." The door creaked open another inch. The scraping sound stopped. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. It felt like something was leaning in, inches from the back of my head. And then, a whisper. Not Ryan's. Low, ragged, breathing against my ear. "I see you." The overhead emergency lights flashed on just for a second, and in the reflection of the glass wall, I saw it. Something tall. Something wrong. A shape standing right behind me, arms too long. Fingers stretched into knotted claw-like points. The head was tilted, farther than humanly possible, its mouth open, too wide, showing a gaping pit of shattered teeth. The light flickered off again, the door slammed shut, and suddenly, I was alone in the dark. No Ryan, no laptop, just silence. And then, tap, tap, tap right against my skull. I ran. I didn't care where. My body moved on instinct, shoving the chair backward, bolting into the dark. The office layout was burned into my brain. I just needed to make it to the elevator, to the stairwell, to anywhere but here. But as I sprinted into the hallway, my stomach plummeted. The office was different. The rows of desks were gone. The layout had changed. The walls stretched too far. The floor warped like it was breathing. Everything smelled wrong. A damp, metallic stink, like rotting copper and burnt hair. I choked down a sob. This isn't real. This isn't real. Then I heard it. Not footsteps. Something crawling. A sick, wet, dragging sound, like flesh peeling off concrete moving fast. Too fast. I turned a corner, and there it was. Ryan. Or what was left of him. He was sitting at a desk that shouldn't be there, bathed in the sickly glow of a computer screen. His head still twisted at that awful angle, mouth stretched in that horrible grin. But now, his fingers were moving again. He was typing. Tap. 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 Ryan, I gasped. My voice didn't sound like mine. His hands never stopped. His fingers bled over the keys, bone poking through raw flesh. But the screen was blank. No words, no documents. Just a blinking cursor, like something was waiting for me. I stepped closer, my stomach turning. What are you doing? His head snapped toward me in one jerking motion. His eyes were boiling black pits, and when he spoke, his voice came from behind me, finishing the file. A notification popped up on the screen. File upload complete. I took a step back. My name was on the file, and the timestamp, 1:43 p.m., the exact time right now. Then, the screen glitched. Letters scrambled. A high-pitched whine filled the air, making my teeth ache. My vision blurred, and for a second, just a second, I wasn't in the office anymore. I saw something else. A hospital room. Fluorescent lights flickering. A heart monitor flatlining. A body on the bed. My body. I felt cold hands on my shoulders, a breath curling against my ear. A voice, static-laced and inhuman. Time's up. The world snapped back, and I was sitting at my desk, back in the normal, quiet office, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. The clock on my screen read 5:50 p.m., as if none of it had happened. Except, there was an email waiting for me, from Ryan Holloway, accounting dept. Subject, no reply. Thanks for staying late. The file's been uploaded. No attachment. No trace of him in the employee directory. No Ryan Holloway in the company records, as if he had never existed. I grabbed my bag, walked out of that office, and never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when I open my laptop, I hear it. Tap. Tap, tap, and when I check my desktop, there's a file waiting for me with a future timestamp, and my name on it, final entry. If you've survived this far and you're one of those who love fear and terror, then don't waste any time. I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any content. The video you're watching on screen is just a taste of what's coming. Watch it. Thank you for being here, and see you next time, if you're capable of handling what's to come.